With the success of the Legend of Zelda franchise, it's hard to imagine that there were any games that were never released. Welcome back to Game Circle. Today we will talk about just some of the known unreleased Zelda games, because as crazy as it sounds, there are even more games that didn't make it to this list. First, let's get the most famous ones out of the way. These games were released, but they were only released in Japan. We start this adventure in Zelda's 16-bit days where it all began. There was a Nintendo attachment called the Satella View that unfortunately was never released outside of Japan. This device connected to the Super Nintendo console and allowed players to download games, magazines, and other content through satellite broadcasts. In other words, back in 1995, Japan was already doing updates, DLCs, all via satellite. Now, the first game released for this platform was BS The Legend of Zelda. This was a remake for the original Zelda game, and they later on released BS Ancient Stone Tablets, which was a remake for A Link to the Past. In both games, you choose and play either as a male or female version of the Satella View mascots. The BS stands for Broadcast Satellite or Broadcast Satella View. There was also a third quest that was made by fans, and you can play all three games through an emulator. Next up, we come across Ura Zelda, or Other Zelda when translated from Japanese. This was to be an add-on for the Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64 disk drive. Since the Nintendo 64 disk drive was cancelled worldwide, they had to discontinue the project, at least for that system. This game was eventually reworked and became Ocarina of Time Master Quest for the GameCube in 2002. The problem is that the Master Quest game only had other versions of the dungeons from Ocarina of Time and none of the additional content which was mentioned before for the Ura Zelda game. Fans have tried to recreate or restore the game since 2010, but these projects always end up being cancelled. Here's some artwork found on these fan projects. Sammy Hall, a former contract artist for Retro Studios, had a folder in his hard drive named Dark Gerudo. This was work that he did for the concept art on a cancelled Zelda game, possibly named Sheik. The idea was a game based on the last male Sheik of the Sheikah tribe. He would be taking over to stop the rebirth of Ganon. It's a dark game that would have existed in the timeline that Link gets killed in Ocarina of Time. The project was dated 2005 to 2008, which would mean that it would have maybe released for the Nintendo Wii or the Wii U. He wrote this about the game. The game was eventually cancelled as Nintendo went for a different game, Skyward Sword. Here is some of the concept art that has been retrieved from this cancelled game. It would seem that most of the so-called canceled games eventually became other games, as Nintendo was even working on a sequel to the Wind Waker, which eventually became Twilight Princess due to the low sales of the Wind Waker game. There was also another Wind Waker sequel that was pitched to Nintendo by David Saliani, the director of Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, and his friend, a designer at Ubisoft Milan, Fabio Paghetti, which would have been for the Game Boy Advance, but the idea was also declined. Now, of course, there are other games being worked on, but we chose not to mention them due to a lack of artwork and videos on those projects. If you have any ideas on which lost games or series we should do next, leave a comment on your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this one at Game Circle.